Hello, my name is Riley Johnston. I'm a third year student here at the University of Oklahoma. Before I get started today, I'd like to just say a quick message. I am terribly sorry I couldn't be there. As I wrote in an email to you or a Canvas notification, um, unfortunately, life kind of happened during this whole Corona thing. My family just needed me, they needed my help. I've got two 10-year-old siblings and one parent who's completely in another state. And both parents have just lost their jobs. So I hope, um, you give me just a little bit of mercy on this. I'm currently recording this at, immediately after I just got them started on their reading. So I've got a little bit of time to get this in. Um, Anyways, thank you for the whole semester so far and everything that you've done for this class. As you can see, even though I'm not there, I still took this kind of experience professionally. I dressed for the occasion. Um, Also, I'd like to point out before I get started that there is nothing on my desk. There's nothing there aiding me, no script or anything of that nature. Um, I do have my PowerPoint up, um, and I will be kind of walking through that, of course, just like I would if I were there tonight. Um, okay, let's get started. As I said before, my name is Riley Johnston, and today I will be talking to you about the evolution of slurs over time in communication. Now, before we get started with that, I would like to just give you a quick quote by Dr. Dashawn Stokes. Stokes is a progressive activist and a scholar. And she quoted, or not, she had this thought that reducing a group to a slur or stereotype reduces us all. This is a great first step and thought into this process, and it's an even better transition into what we're kind of going to be talking about. So, harmful communication. First, I would like to talk about what a slur is exactly, because I think a lot of people get confused with the hard definition of it, which it's pretty clear cut. The definition of a slur is literally anything in speech, in communication, that is meant to harm or damage another person. Moving on from that, now that we kind of know that, moving on, I'd like to talk about three things that are pretty much aiding, our communication, aiding this evolution of slurs through our communication. One being history, the second being culture, and of course, social climate. As we are all aware of, our social climate's a very different thing today than it was, back in the 1800s. Now, when I look and break these three things down, I want to kind of focus on current examples mainly. So the media will have a big role in things. So whether that's our music that we listen to, our TV, or social media, as we've seen many times in the past year of our university with whether it was the whole girls in the blackface scandal, all of that. Just media has become a very big part of our lives. Let me move on here. So first, the history of slurs. Michael Moore is my first source, who wrote about the idea of the adaptation of slurs over time, right? The history of a word, the etymology, where it originates. So back in the day, the Romans created a word for a group known as the Berbers. It was a North American tribe, North African tribe, whose language and way of life was foreign to the Romans, of course. And so they came up with the term barbarian. Barbarian had a very, just a simple connotation, just straight up like barbarian means it was foreign to them, whatever. And so it came as Berber was the origin of that tribe's name. Now, if you progress to now in our world today, I think we can clearly see that the word barbarian typically has a more negative connotation in speech. If I call something barbaric, it's not foreign necessarily, but it's like grotesque or, any amount of synonym, right? Anything that goes along with that, it's got a negative connotation. Now, focusing more in on that negative connotation aspect, like you can sit there and think like, typically people wouldn't sit and say barbarian is a slur, right? I mean, it's not something that you'd think about every day because that's a common word, that's most people use. But if I could, I would like to direct your attention just to how that North African tribe, the Berbers, how they feel, how they would have felt if they're around today, how that word would make them feel, considering that's where their origin came from, and it's isolating them, right? It's making them a part of something that has a negative connotation. So that's just as far as history goes. There's many examples of that too. Moving on, kind of talking about the cultural appropriation, right? And this plays into the second, our culture, the second part. And so there's kind of two studies that I'd like to focus on here about the cultural appropriation of slurs. One study was done by Ruth King and Sandra Clark. They did a study about the Newfoundland province of Canada and the other surrounding provinces in Canada. Their study shows that slurs have established sort of social classes, and they establish social classes through, if you don't know anything about Newfoundland, Canada, which I didn't at first, but Newfoundland, Canada is a very poor province, essentially. And everybody else in Canada, all the other provinces, they refer to people from Newfoundland as Newfies, okay? Now that term to the rest of the world literally would mean nothing. It would essentially just, it sounds like a made-up word, and it is. All words are made up, but Newfie has no particular connotation to us. Now, to somebody of Newfoundland and somebody in Canada, if you were to use that word, they would know that you are referring to somebody of a much poorer social class or social status than that of another province of Canada. And that is a very big problem. Culturally, they're kind of appropriating that term. Moving on to the also like the social acceptance. There were another studies that were kind of joined together by one study was by Krum, Fasoli, Carnegie, and Palladino, and it was a study talking about like how media essentially aids this, and this is kind of that main point that I was trying to get at. The media in our society today. This was a very important part of my research because our culture has a very, very, very bad habit of accepting just whatever comes to us in any form of media, whether it's social media or music or TV shows or whatever. We just accept it. And I kind of want to focus in like thinking about, just an example being music. I mean, today, I would argue that over half of the hip-hop genre of music or rap is, contains numerous amounts of slurs that people just kind of overlook. Slurs about ethnicity or race, and mainly slurs about gender. Um, the words hoe or slut or bitch are thrown around, um, and it's kind of not necessarily okay. I mean, we've deemed it okay because it's everywhere in our world, but when you really think about it, those words in that music, they hurt people. And so that was kind of a big point. So just kind of also think about that. And finally, I kind of want to talk about where we go from here. So starting with the lifetime of a slur, right? Whether it's historical connotation or from recent events, right? Essentially meaning like, the historical negative connotation of a certain word that may or may not be used, and that we've seen in our own community here at Oklahoma, used multiple times. It hurts people, right? It shouldn't matter, right? That historical connotation shouldn't matter because it's not up to our interpretation. The person who decides to use a slur, it's not up to that person's interpretation. The interpretation is up to that of the individual who's hearing it, who's receiving it. As a community, right? I believe it's kind of time to begin the process of using our words to bolster anyone who hears them and bring them up. I think it's time for our media to stop socially appropriating slurs in parts of the world that are different from our own. I think it's time for all of us to start seeing us individuals as a crucial part of the in-group that I'm going to refer to as just human beings. When we have this kind of behavior of all the things that I just said, I think it's possible to finally start putting an end to, this really long uphill battle that is a very negative part of our communication. That being slurs. Whether it's an in-group or an out-group, slurs, they hurt people, and they can be anything. They can be anything from what I described earlier to, your roommate calling you short or whatever. If it harms you as an individual, then that is therefore classified as a slur. So anything can really become a slur in communication. That's why I'm thinking, we should just focus on, instead of trying to harm people, whether it's in jest or not, we should focus on just being kind and realizing that the other person is a human being as well. That's all my time. Thank you so much. Again, I apologize I could not be there. I hope this works for you. Take it easy.